MIT has released its class of 2028 profile, and there are some significant changes in the composition of that class relative to the students in the class of 2027. That is the topic of today's video. My name is Craig Meister. I'm a college admissions coach. You can learn more about me and how you can work with me one-on-one throughout the entire college admissions process on my website, which is collegemeister.com. And if you're interested in learning about whether or not you are or your student is on track for selective college admission in the United States, visit areyouontracktogetin.com. Again, that's areyouontracktogetin.com, at which you will complete a free 3-minute assessment. Your results will be emailed to you right away, and they will help you clarify whether or not you are or your student is on track for selective college admission in the United States of America. Last year, MIT released this information for the class of 2027 that included 1,092 members. 49% were men, 48% were women, 4% were another gender identity, and 2% did not disclose their gender identity. In terms of citizenship and self-reported ethnicity, 90% were U.S. citizens and permanent residents, and 49 states were represented. 2% were American Indian or Native Alaskan. 40% were Asian American. Black/African American was 15%. Hispanic/Latino was 16%. Native Hawaiian/Pacific Islander 1%. White/Caucasian 38%. And international citizens 10%. 59 countries were represented. The total, of course, exceeds the number 100 because there is some overlap in some of those self-identifications. They also include different information about schooling and geography, and also, for fun, the most popular names and the most represented U.S. state. They do that again this year with their class of 2028 profile, which includes 1,102 members, 50% men this year, 46% women, 3% another gender, 3% did not disclose gender identity. In terms of citizenship and self-reported ethnicity, U.S. citizens and permanent residents, again, representing 49 states. I'd like to know the state that's not represented. That would be interesting. But is 89%. So that didn't change much. That was basically last year 90%. American Indian/Alaskan Native went down to 1%. So that's cut in two from last year's 2%. Asian American has gone up from 40% for the class of 2027 to 47% for the class of 2028. Black/African American has fallen precipitously from 15% last cycle and for the class of 2027 to 5% for the class of 2028. Hispanic Latino is now at 11%, whereas last year it was also higher, 16%. Hawaiian Pacific Islander last year was 1%. This year is 0%. So that's not good in terms of that representation. White Caucasian this year is 37%. Last year, it was 38%. So whites have taken a slight hit as well. And international citizens have actually gone up a little bit to 11% from last year's 10%. And again, they did the geography thing again this year. They also did the schooling, showing what types of schools students are matriculating from. And also, just for fun, different names. Eric and Sophia are now very popular. California remains its biggest feeder state. So there's a lot of hand-wringing at MIT. The president has put out a video. I'll link it below. She's put out a letter. The director of admissions, Stu, has put out a letter. They're hand-wringing about this. They're very upset, but they don't quite know what to do other than throw more money at the problem and recruit more from diverse locations, as well as say they're going to basically make it free for people of a certain income level, which I think is sort of interesting that they sort of equate this all with income issues. It's clearly not all income issues. Obviously, it's other issues, of course, as well. They make their own surmising of what's really at play here. I don't necessarily subscribe to everything that is happening, but unlike some of the other schools we've talked about who've put out their their college profiles, for this class of 2028, this is the first school we've really seen markedly different numbers. And it does sort of bring to mind, like, what's going on here? Why isn't MIT having a bigger issue than other schools? MIT, of the schools we've looked at, is the first school that is test required. Whereas the other schools, Tulane and WashU, now WashU didn't share the demographic information, but Colorado College, Olin, those schools, Haverford, those are not test required. MIT is test required. But one thing that MIT points out, and I will share it here now, is that when we look at the actual statistics for the class of 2028 in terms of scores, the scores are basically the exact same, middle 50% range as last year, the class of 2027. So this is the class of 2028 scores, middle 50% range. So what you see is basically of the students getting accepted who submitted SAT scores, the 25th percentile had a 780. The 75th percentile had an 800, which basically means everyone from the 75th percentile and higher has an 800 on the math SAT at MIT who submitted SAT scores. For evidence-based reading and writing, or whatever they're calling that now, that is 740 to 780, the middle 50%. For the ACT math, again, you see these are numbers from all the class of 2028. But let's now toggle to the same information from the class of 2027. There is no change, none at all. So MIT is sort of both humble bragging about the fact that there's no change at all here. And everyone was qualified to get in last year. Everyone's qualified to get in this year. Well, that's not what happened then. Like, the Black population went from 15% to 5% in 1 year. The Hispanic population went down about 5%. So what's going on? And so obviously they look at they're holistic. They look at your grades, the rigor of your curriculum, your short essays. They look at as well, and your writing on those, as well as your test scores and letters of recommendation. So they look at all these things. MIT does not subscribe to the Common App. It has its own application. So what really happened here? How can the scores be the exact same and the demographics flip so much? What's happened is there's nothing I can say other than what appears to have happened is that the 5% fewer Latinos and the 10% fewer Blacks/African Americans in the class of 2028 compared to the class of 2027. It looks to me as though it's because of something happening outside of the middle 50% of test scores. And because you know that MIT did not want to have to report this and have to have this be the case. What's happening is they're faithfully interpreting the decision of the Supreme Court of the United States that affirmative action is no longer allowed in college admissions. I don't know if all the other colleges are faithfully interpreting the college admissions decision of the Supreme Court, but MIT is. And they're just playing it right down the middle. And basically what's happened is they've lost 2/3 of the Black students from 1 year to the next. That's a big deal. And they've also lost 5%. I'm not 5%. That's actually not. They've gone down 5 percentage points, but they've lost close to 1/3 basically of the Latino population representation from 1 year to the next. And of course, Asian Americans have gone up from 40% to 47% concurrently. So they're wringing their hands about this. You may be too. Others will celebrate this and say, this is, the free market or whatever. I mean, there are going to be a lot of different people who say different things about this. But how could this have happened if the middle 50% test score stayed the same? The reason this happened is because something happening in the bottom 25th% of test scores. That's why it happened. So with that objective rubrics as a requirement at MIT, whereas it has not been a requirement at other schools that have released their class of 2028 profiles so far, none of which, of course, are as selective as MIT, but some schools are selected that we've talked about. Not as selective, but they're still selective. What's happened is this is the school that requires test scores. And so of the test scores in the bottom 25th percent, there must be some issues there. That range may have been wider in past years, meaning the full span of that range to get the demographics they've had previously must have been wider. And this year, it must have been narrower, meaning they weren't willing to go as far down the numbers of SAT and ACT scores, because what they must have been doing is doing that for certain applicants, but not others. And they were basing that probably off of self-reported ethnicity. And now, without being able to do that legally any longer, that one change has done this. Black and Hispanic grades have not changed from year to year. Black and Hispanic essay writing skills have not changed from year to year. Black and Hispanic test scores have not changed from year to year. But how MIT has judged them, depending on one's race or ethnicity, or self-reported race or ethnicity, has changed. So it could also be, I'm not saying it is, but it could also be that Black and Hispanic students are performing worse on the essay writing. Or it could be that Black and Hispanic students are performing worse on the grades. And now, without the ability to make adjustments based off of race or self-reported ethnicity, MIT has seen these demographic switcheroos happening. So I believe, because it's a test required institution, it's most likely the scores. The essays are harder to pin because they're more subjectively judged at all institutions. And you would think MIT would probably put even more subjectivity in the judgment of their very short essays leading into the last cycle anyway, knowing that the affirmative action ruling had come down. So I don't think it's probably the essay skill. The essay, you can't write a really great essay with the MIT essay prompts because they're very short. So, unless there's just hugely horrible grammar and it was all being just passed over for years for certain types of applicants, I doubt that is where the issue is. It's either, they were willing to go different in the GPA ranges, or they were willing to go different in the SAT or ACT scores. Now, they do not report at MIT the grade point averages for the accepted students, which is good, actually, because, GPAs are all fake these days. Basically, most schools give A's. But they do provide real data, which is the SAT or ACT scores, which are standardized, which is important when you think about putting out a high school college profile. So this is most likely a function of the SAT or ACT scores. I mean, most kids applying to MIT who have anything of a shot are getting straight A's. So the test scores tell the tale, in my opinion. And so this really raises serious questions as to, why is it? Why is it happening that potentially different groups are scoring so differently? Now, again, MIT would make the argument that it's because of systemic issues in society. It didn't affect, obviously, 1/3 of the blacks who've been getting in every year because they still got in. The other 2/3 got completely wiped out by this. Same thing with the Hispanics. About 1/3 of the Hispanics are no longer coming, whereas size-wise that used to. So it's not just systemic, because there are plenty of Hispanics and there are plenty of blacks and African Americans who are completely capable of earning their way into MIT without affirmative action, clearly. But it's not as many as during affirmative action. So this is an interesting bellwether. We will see if this is repeated at similarly selective schools though far fewer similarly selective schools were test required during the 23-24 admission cycle than will be during the 24-25 admission cycle. So it will be interesting to see, without that scoring available to them or required to be available to them in the admissions offices at similarly selective schools, if there is a more tepid version of this precipitous fall for certain demographic groups, or the same, or even a greater one. I don't know. And that could also help us troubleshoot if it's really the scores, or if it's the writing, or if it's the essays, or if it's, the grades, or the transcripts, or the rigor. I mean, that's the other thing it could be too, is like, it could be the rigor, and maybe that there wasn't enough rigor in the curriculum of certain demographic groups on average relative to other demographic groups. And without giving a plus for race or ethnicity, that lack of rigor in certain populations potentially could have been enough. But I again would argue it's lower 25th percentile of the SAT or ACT score range. I just believe, without any actual proof, but I just believe, because they report it and they really are numbers driven over at MIT, because it is that type of institution, very data centric, very focused on brass tacks facts. I gotta believe it's a function of the middle 25th percentile. Let's say that they were willing to go, I'm just making it up, as low as on average 1450 on the SAT for this year, for, unless there's some really special talent in an applicant. In past years, maybe they were willing to go down to 1300 or 1350 in order to capture certain types of applicants only, i.e. individuals based off of affirmative action. They were not clearly willing or able to do that across the board, because if they were willing to do it across the board and in this year we got these results, it wouldn't make sense. That must have been the affirmative action, I think, trigger that caused the numbers to be the way they are this year. But I could be wrong, because it could be a combination of that in the transcript rigor, in the grades. It could be a combination of that in the writing. But I think, being a data-centric institution, MIT probably would not have they probably would have created more cushion around that, especially the writing. So it's either the transcript or the test scores. But it is interesting, and again, they're very upset about it, because mission-wise, MIT believes that diversity of entering classes contributes to the MIT experience. Now, what the magic number is, I guess, is the number they were getting before for affirmative action, right? That's like sort of, they want 15% Black. They want 16% Hispanic. That, I guess, is magical enough for MIT. Clearly now they're below what they deem to be their magic number, which is why they're doing the hand-wringing and the videos and the big letters with all these citations, which, again, I'm linking below this video. But who elected these individuals king to say that 15% was right? Maybe it should be 20% Black and 25% Hispanic. It was noted in one of their letters, the fact is that increasingly, like, the majority of public school students in the United States are not white. And so it's concerning to the powers that be at MIT that they could have an entering class that looks like this in that context. So that's, of course, their opinion. They are entitled to their opinion. But the question is, will they change things and how they review things moving forward? Other schools have made very explicit, like Johns Hopkins, that they're going to judge your SAT scores on a sliding scale depending on how disadvantaged they think you are. And in many cases, schools like that equate disadvantage with certain zip codes that are high, now primarily majority minority, i.e. Hispanic and or Black. Now, again, it's harder to reach out into the world abroad and zip code it. But the other thing that you have to note here is that they splice it at every school a little differently. Here they say Asian American. They didn't say Asian/Asian American at MIT. And they also have Black/African American at the MIT listing here. That includes Blacks from other places than the United States. That means if you're Black in Kenya, you're not African American, but you're Black. If you're Black in Jamaica, that you're Black, but you're not African American. So the actual 5% number is not even fully 5% African American or Americans who are Black. It it could have a hefty amount in there of international students who are Black. So that's concerning when, you know, certain population in our country of Black, I think 13, 14% of the United States population. So they're feeling the heat at MIT right now about this. And all we can do here on this channel is just continue to report out what these colleges are reporting and compare and contrast as we get more profiles. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. If you'd like to work with me one-on-one throughout the entire college admissions process, go to my website, which is collegemeister.com. Until next time, stay safe, stay well, and most importantly, stay stress-free throughout the entire college admissions process.